What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. I'm your host, Hutch Brown, and today we've got a fantastic show. We are looking at week 2 of NFL free agency and trades. Wave 2, we've got a lot of news to talk about here, a lot of things that went down. So not only are we going to get into wave 2, some things that happened this past week, but we're going to catch up on things that we missed last week that we didn't get to last week. And then we're also going to talk about some sleeper signings, some things that went under the radar and that we need to briefly mention, maybe talk a little bit of fantasy analysis, but things that went very under the radar. And we're also going to talk about some headlines at offensive line and defense in terms of free agency and NFL trades, so we can get a little idea of where some of the offensive line defenses went in free agency. It helps us understand better what we need to do with these teams for fantasy football purposes. So before I get everything today, please follow me on Twitter. I'm at HutchsonB_FF. And also subscribe to this podcast so you're notified every single time a new episode drops, whether you're listening to Apple, Spotify, or your favorite audio app, or you're watching on YouTube. Without further ado, let's get right into it. We're going to start with the quarterback position. Geno Smith. We talked about Sam Darnold last week. We didn't talk about Geno Smith. He was traded to the Raiders for a third-round pick. Sam Darnold's going to replace him there in Seattle. Now, looking at Geno Smith to the Raiders, there have been rumors that a long-term extension could be coming. However, it hasn't really materialized in anything serious, so I'm guessing that this is going to be a bridge quarterback situation and that Las Vegas is absolutely still a contender to draft a rookie quarterback at the top of the draft. But given that Geno Smith will likely be the starter for the Raiders in 2025, this is definitely a sigh of relief for Brock Bowers. Obviously, Brock Bowers last year with, terrible quarterback play was absolutely phenomenal. He had one of the best, if not the best rookie season for a tight end of all time. He was incredible, arguably already the best tight end in the National Football League. And now that he has a serviceable veteran quarterback like Geno Smith, someone that can at least get him the football decently accurately, you got a sigh of relief for him, drafting him as a tight end one in fantasy, valuing so high in Dynasty. It's nice to have that presence at quarterback. And looking at the rest of the receiving room, obviously you have Jacoby Myers. And Jacoby Myers, if he's alone in this receiving room, obviously has a very good chance to be fantasy relevant with Geno Smith, a veteran quarterback with Myers, a guy who's safe and knows how to get open and find the soft spot in the zones. He would be a great player to pair up with Geno Smith. I feel like they would have a great connection. So Jacoby Myers has a chance to be fantasy relevant. However, the wide receiver market and the Raiders team have been very in sync. There have been a lot of rumors spread that the Raiders are going to add a receiver early in the draft or add a receiver in free agency. There are still a few free agents available. And if they add a piece of significance, this would push Jacoby Myers down to that nearly fantasy irrelevant range. It would just severely cap his upside. Because while I like Geno Smith, if Brock Bowers is in this offense and then you have a significant receiver as the wide receiver one in the offense, Jacoby Myers is likely to be left to the dust. Now, looking at the rest of the quarterbacks that have not been signed yet, there are 3 quarterbacks primarily that have not been signed yet as of this recording. We're recording this early Thursday morning. Aaron Rodgers, Jameis Winston, and Kirk Cousins. These 3 players have not been signed yet. Aaron Rodgers has been heavily rumored between the Giants and the Steelers. The Vikings have been in there kind of as well, but it feels like the Vikings don't really want him, to be honest. That's what I've seen so far based on reports. And then Jameis Winston has been heavily linked to the Giants. Obviously, it's not real yet, but Jameis Winston might be going to the Giants. And if he does, man, Malik Nabers has a strong chance to be ranked as my wide receiver 1 heading into next year. Like, Jameis is going to be good for fantasy. He chucks the ball downfield. He doesn't care if it's double or triple coverage. Yes, he'll throw a lot of interceptions. Yes, he'll cost his team some wins, but he will give us good fantasy value when he's on the field. And then Kirk Cousins, quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons. He has been kept for a little bit. There's been a lot of heat between the two teams because obviously Kirk Cousins wants an opportunity to start somewhere. And I think he will get it. I think they'll let him go, and I think he'll get an opportunity to start somewhere. We just don't know where it is yet. And now let's go to what I'm calling the mostly meaningless signings, things that are not crazy relevant for fantasy, but at least just to know, right? Jimmy Garoppolo back with the Rams. Joshua Dobbs is on the Patriots now. Nick Mullins is going to Jacksonville to replace Mac Jones. Zach Wilson's going to the Dolphins. And Mac Jones, who's leaving Jacksonville, is going to San Francisco on a 2-year deal. San Francisco, Kyle Shanahan finally gets his guy. I remember in the draft conversations when San Fran was sitting there at 3, it felt like Kyle Shanahan would love Mac Jones. Like, Mac Jones was his quarterback where it's like he's a perfect system quarterback, pocket passer, You're not asking him too much. You just ask him to run the system and to be perfectly fine. And we did not see Mac Jones get selected to 3. We saw Trey Lance get selected to 3, and we all know how that turned out. But Kyle Shanahan finally gets his Mac Jones back. I don't think he's going to be starting over Brock Purdy, obviously, but if Brock Purdy would ever go down, I think you have a serviceable backup here in Mac Jones. He proved to be a really solid, capable backup in Jacksonville. Now, let's move to the running back position. Rico Dowdle signed to the Carolina Panthers. This happened shortly after my first week's recording of Free Agency News. Rico Dowdle signed by the Carolina Panthers, a 1-year, $3 million deal. Now, looking at Chuba Hubbard, obviously Chuba Hubbard's not going to get 100% of the touches like he was at a lot of points last season. We knew a backup was going to come in. We knew somebody had to be put in this offense. And Rico Dowdle's the guy. And while I think Rico Dowdle's a very solid back, he had, nearly 1,000-yard season last year, was a top 10 back in fantasy football, especially in the second half of the season. I don't think this is much of an effect to Chuba Hubbard. Hubbard has the long-term money, the long-term value on his name. He had a phenomenal season last year with 1,300-plus scrimmage yards, over 10 touchdowns. Phenomenal year last year when Carolina really needed him most. Scored a game-winning touchdown in OT against the Atlanta Falcons in the last game of the season. The dude was incredible last year, and Carolina rewarded him heavily. I just think this is more of a diss to Jonathan Brooks, and it's telling us that Jonathan Brooks is going to miss 2025. Like, they're just going to put him on ice and say, you know what, we're not going to risk re-tearing your ACL again. We're not going to risk anything else. You are going to sit in IR for the 2025 season, and we're going to have Rico Dowdle to back him up. And I think in 2026, Jonathan Brooks will get his chance, but this just diminishes any chance we had of Jonathan Brooks playing in 2025 to me. Rico Dowdle's the number 2 back, and even if Jonathan Brooks does come back, I just don't think he's going to be able to work his way on the field. You have 2 serviceable backs here, Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard. And then a couple guys that have not been signed yet. You have Nick Chubb and J.K. Dobbins, and it's really concerning to see because I'm going to get to the mostly meaningless signs in a second with all these other players that are getting 1-year deals with teams. The fact that Dobbins and Chubb have not been able to get contracts yet is incredibly concerning to how NFL teams view these 2 players. I'm not feeling great about where they're at. I mean, I never was, but I'm really not feeling great about where they're at now. Now, let's get to the mostly meaningless signs. Raheem Mostert to the Vegas on a 1-year deal. He'll be a great backup to, I think, it's going to be Ashton Genty at 6. But he'll be a great backup. He's not going to be the starting back for this team, though. Elijah Mitchell and Kareem Hunt to KC, both 1-year contracts. Now, this one's interesting a little bit because I think this gives us a small breath of relief for Isaiah Pacheco. If the backfield was basically empty heading into the 2025 draft and we had Isaiah Pacheco and almost no one else, I would have been incredibly concerned that KC was going to take a significant running back in the draft. But now you have 2 backups where it's like, okay, Mitchell's a solid back when he's healthy. Kareem Hunt proved to be at least somewhat serviceable last year. We have our backups. Isaiah Pacheco's our starter. And I saw some tweets after Kareem Hunt got signed specifically that were like, watch out for a split between Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco. And I get why people are saying that because it's what we saw last year. I don't think that's the case. Isaiah Pacheco was clearly not healthy last year. When you watch him play in the first couple weeks and then you watch him play when he came back from injury, there was significant difference. He was clearly not the same player. Off that fractured fibula, it was clearly a difference-making injury. And looking to what Pacheco will do next year, he's going to be more healthy. He's going to be ready to go. He's going to be back to his old self, his 2022, 2023, early 2024 self. And that's going to be the starting back of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, looking towards the rest of these signings, Samaje Perine going back to the Bengals, 2-year, $3.5 million deal. Ty Johnson back in Buffalo. This one's actually kind of impactful to me. Ty Johnson had some really great plays last year. While he isn't on the field a significant amount, it does just take a couple touches away from James Cook and keeps him outside that top-tier range unless James Cook is scoring an elite amount of touchdowns, which, personally, don't expect next year. And then Kenneth Gainwell with Pittsburgh on a 1-year deal. This one's also somewhat significant, too, because it's to the same thing Isaiah Pacheco when, signing backups makes you feel like you're not going to add significant back in the draft. The Steelers right now have Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell, and obviously they could absolutely add somebody. But Kenneth Gainwell is a decent backup, and Jaylen Warren has proven in previous years, not much this past year because of injury, but in previous years he's proven that he can be a capable starting back. Pittsburgh's want to keep an eye on for an NFL draft running back, but I'm not 100% confident they're going to add one after this signing. Now, let's move to the wide receiver position. We have 3 things to talk about here. Cooper Kupp signing with Seattle on a 3-year, $45 million deal. It's just kind of sad to watch a press conference because they were talking to Cooper Kupp and asking him, what happened with the Rams? Like, did you get any communication on why they released you, why they wanted to trade you so bad? And Kupp was kind of just like, yeah, no, I didn't get much. I really don't understand what happened. It sucks. I wanted to be a Ram, and it just didn't happen that way. It's really unfortunate to see how that all played out. I wonder really what happened behind the scenes there in LA. It seemed like there was a problem, but I don't know what it was. But that's all I can do is speculate. Now, looking at what Cooper Kupp does on this team for fantasy, this is a really tough one because when you look at Cooper Kupp and JSN, you see two primarily slot wide receivers, and that's totally fair to assume they're both primary slot wide receivers because that's what they've done their whole career. However, I think Jackson Smith-Njigba can actually play outside. He's been put in the slot a lot in his career at Ohio State and Seattle because he's been surrounded by primary outside wide receivers. You have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave in Ohio State, and then you have DK Metcalf, who is a outside dominator in Seattle. So it forces Jackson Smith-Njigba to play in the slot a lot. But when you watch him on the outside, he looks just as good as he does in the slot. The numbers are there. The efficiency is there. The route running is elite. He's able to make plays on the outside as well. I think we're going to see a situation where JSN becomes a more versatile asset and he gets moved all around the field a little bit more, maybe even gets in the jet sweep game. We've seen him be able to do that a couple times in his collegiate and his NFL career. I think we're going to see a lot of creativity with Jackson Smith-Njigba while Cooper Kupp stays in that primary slot role. So next thing we got to talk about here is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, both getting 4-year deals worth $69 total million annually. That is incredible. Chase getting $40.25 million per year, making him the highest paid non-quarterback of all time in terms of annual salary. And then looking at Higgins, he gets $28.75 million per year. Great deal. Love it. Love to see these guys staying in Cincinnati. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins are both locked into Cincinnati for the next 3-4 years. Love to see that for fantasy football purposes because T. Higgins, while playing with Drake May could have been fun, playing with Bryce Young could have been fun, Cincinnati, even with Jamar Chase there, is likely his best option. You have an elite quarterback in Joe Burrow, and you're a top-tier option in the offense. And while you're not the wide receiver one, you're getting a wide receiver one kind of target share. Now, looking at Joe Burrow, I talked about some potential regression for Joe Burrow on the divisional review series. And looking now where this team is at, where the extensions are at, and where this defense is at, you can't really say that with confidence anymore. Because I was expecting, when I was talking about Joe Burrow regression, I was expecting Bengals are going to make some additions to their weak defense. Higgins could be gone. This could be a whole different team. But in reality, they signed their offensive players. They extended Mike Gesicki as well. That's an underrated part of this conversation. And then they completely did not add anything on defense. They added a couple veterans, but not impactful enough to make up for their losses of Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson, who hasn't been traded yet, but he's likely to be traded pretty soon. The Bengals are just going to have to throw 40, 50 times a game. Joe Burrow is going to have to throw 2-3 touchdowns a game. And this Bengals team is going to have to score 40 points a game if they want to compete in contests. They just have to. If they want to get to 9-8, 10-7, Joe Burrow is going to have a ridiculously good season. You're going to have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins be incredibly productive. And for fantasy, it's going to be incredibly explosive. It's going to be really fun. And I don't see a regression season coming because Joe Burrow is going to be forced to put up ridiculous numbers in order to win games. And an underrated part of this conversation too is Chase Brown. Look, I understand, in the divisional review series again, when I talk about Chase Brown, I was like, man, I see regression for Joe Burrow, and I also see the Bengals adding him back to this offense. Chase Brown was okay last year. He was serviceable, but I think the Bengals are going to want more. That was assuming they would make additions on defensive free agency. They did not. The entire top of the draft for them is likely going to be focused on defense. They add Samaje Perine to have a serviceable veteran backup, but it looks like Chase Brown's going to be the guy next year. They're going to give him a chance. And that's going to be elite for fantasy because even if he was inefficient like he was last year, he's still going to be really, really good for fantasy. He was average in terms of efficiency. He was average in terms of explosive runs, but he was elite for fantasy because he got a lot of receiving work because Joe Burrow threw the ball so much. You have to throw the running back a few times a game, and Chase Brown's good at it. You got a lot of touchdown opportunity, and you had a few explosive plays here and there that helped his fantasy value jump up. He was an RB1 down the stretch for fantasy playoff teams. It was monstrous. And I think we can see that same kind of value next year. Right now in best ball, Chase Brown's being drafted around that RB15 range. Assuming that there's no high-tier running back added in the draft, if we get RB15 value heading into next year, I'm going to be all in. I'm going to be really, really interested in Chase Brown at that price. I think I'd be ranking him more as a top 10 running back. Now looking at Christian Kirk, he got traded to the Houston Texans. Didn't talk about this last week, but I'm going to talk about it here. This is fun, man. I think this is an incredible signing by the Houston Texans. I hate to say it for Tank Dell, but this is a great signing for the Texans team. Like, they need somebody, man. Tank Dell, while I thought he was a talented prospect and while he had a great rookie season, the dude has had multiple season-ending injuries at 165 pounds. And these are injuries that affect you long-term. Both of these injuries. The fibula and I think it was Lisfranc. Yes, it was a Lisfranc injury, and then you had the blown-up knee, torn ACL, MCL, dislocated knee, like brutal injury. That's probably going to keep him out all of 2025 and potentially limit him in 2026, and then at that point, he's a free agent. It's going to be brutal looking at Tank Dell's the rest of career outlook. I said this on the visual review series, but this guy could be out of the league pretty quickly if he doesn't, show that healthy Tank Dell that we saw in his rookie season. But looking at this signing, it's definitely a bump down for Tank Dell. He's likely going to miss the 2025 season anyway, so you're likely not really looking at him much in fantasy for next year. But Christian Kirk, I think, could be a phenomenal asset. I mean, Dalton Schultz had that underneath area target share last year. I think that he gets completely limited, and I think this goes to Christian Kirk. And looking at the Texans as a team, have Stephon Diggs leaving, have Tank Dell leaving, that's a ton of targets. Like 100-plus targets, even though those guys miss games, 100-plus targets leaving. I think a lot of those are going to go to Christian Kirk, man. I think we're going to see a definite wide receiver 3 season, if not approaching that top 24 range. He is a perfect wide receiver for C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud's a great quarterback when it comes to timing, when it comes to precision, accuracy, especially in the intermediate ranges of the field, and that's where Christian Kirk lines up best. He lines up in that slot position. He can line up outside as well, but primarily in Jacksonville, he was a slot wide receiver, and he can work that underneath area. He can do all those things, find the soft spot in the zone, get open in man coverage, and be a great target for C.J. Stroud, while Nico Collins is presenting a dominant presence on the outside. Love to see this connection. I think these two wide receivers in Christian Kirk and Nico Collins make an excellent duo together. And now we're looking at some wide receivers who have not been signed yet. Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, and Stephon Diggs. I get Cooper and Diggs. Diggs coming off an ACL. He's older. Cooper had a terrible, end of his season in Buffalo, and he was okay in the Cleveland offense too. Looking at Keenan Allen, though, I don't get why he hasn't been signed yet. If I were an NFL team, Keenan Allen would have been one of the first players I would have called. He is a very good veteran wide receiver with a high football IQ who is incredibly smart. He knows how to get open. He knows where to be for the football. Like, if I had a young developing quarterback, someone like a Bryce Young, Bo Nix, Drake May, I would love to have a veteran wide receiver like Keenan Allen in my offense. He earned a 20+% target share last year in Chicago's broken offense and still put up nearly 800 yards in 15 games. While that isn't elite production, while that isn't production we've seen from Keenan Allen before, that's still really solid. And the thing about Allen, he's not dependent on crazy athleticism. He's just good at football. He knows where he needs to be, and he's great footwork and great route running ability. That can play into your 30s. He is 34 years old. He's approaching that cliff where even for him, it's going to hit soon. But he can still ball, man. Everything he showed last year is that he can still ball. I would be looking heavily at Keenan Allen if I were an NFL team. It's surprising that he hasn't been signed yet to me. And then looking at the mostly meaningless signings at wide receiver, you have Josh Palmer to the Bills on a 3-year contract, $36 million. I think this was extensive for him. He is a serviceable wide receiver. He can fill in when you need him, but he's not much more than that. I do think this is a threat to Keon Coleman, though. Keon Coleman had a terrible rookie season. I mean, Personally, I've never been in. I've never understood Keon Coleman. I never got it with him. He was one of my biggest busts heading in the NFL draft season. You all know that if you listen to me. And Josh Palmer's a threat to that. He's someone that is a big play guy, contested catches, can work downfield. That's Josh Palmer. And Keon Coleman is supposed to be that same player, but he's really not. He is a player who is kind of fast, but a bad route runner, no footwork, no technique, and not that good at contested catches. Like, he's just not a good football player. He really isn't. He's a decent athlete and not a good football player. I just don't get it with Keon Coleman, man. He barely made any flashes last year, so I'm not surprised Josh Palmer is signed here. I'm not surprised they went out and got a big play wide receiver that can help him out where Keon Coleman was lacking last year. Now, Nick Westbrook-Akine to the Dolphins, almost 10 touchdowns last year. Someone to keep an eye on, but this is already a crowded receiving room, so I'm not really invested for fantasy. Matt Collins to the Patriots. I mean, the Patriots need to add somebody else. Matt Collins better not be their wide receiver one. I mean, if he is, he could be fantasy relevant. He had some really great plays in Buffalo, but he's mostly just a fun guy who doesn't wear shoes. And then you got DeAndre Hopkins to the Ravens. I don't think this is fantasy relevant at all. He was barely a wide receiver 3 on the Chiefs, and the Baltimore team is loaded, and they don't pass as much as the Chiefs. This could limit Rashad Bateman, but I think D-Hop is basically washed at this point. He's just not that good anymore. I don't think he's going to have a fantasy impact here in Baltimore. Then you have Devontae Turpin re-signs with the Cowboys, the speedster back in Dallas on a 3-year deal. Darius Slayton re-signs with the Giants, 3 years, $36 million. That could have been Saquon. That kind of money right there. Tutu Atwell resigns with the Rams. Demarcus Robinson to the 49ers. And then Adam Thielen staying in Carolina. This last one definitely interests me. Absolutely here. Adam Thielen staying in Carolina because the Carolina Panthers will likely add a big-time wide receiver in this draft. But with how Bryce Young played last year, there could be room for multiple receiving options in this offense to be very fantasy relevant. Adam Thielen showed that he still got it last year, and while he's very, very old and he's approaching that age cliff, he could still be fantasy relevant last year. So I'm not drafting him highly. I'm not drafting him with significance, but at least keep an eye on him. And then last thing I want to say about this, looking at all these names, a lot of smaller name wide receivers are getting big contracts. I mean, Tutu Atwell got a $10 million deal. Demarcus Robinson getting a 2-year, $9.5 million deal. Darius Slayton, $36 million. The fact that these small name wide receivers are getting bigger contracts shows how not confident the NFL draft is in this receiving room, especially, I would say, in terms of its depth. There are some great players at the top. Tetra McMillan's going to be great. I think Luther Burden is a phenomenal prospect. He's arguably my wide receiver 1. He's really close to that to me in this class. We're going to get to a lot of prospect breakdowns over future weeks, so we'll talk about my rankings in this class and all that. It'll be great. But anyways, back to this. There's not a lot of depth in this receiving class, though. It falls off pretty quickly to me. And I think the NFL views it that way as well, which is why they're giving contracts like this to smaller name players. And now looking at the tight end position, there's not much to talk about here. There's one player to talk about that we didn't talk about yet. Juwan Johnson, 3 years, $31 million. I think this is a stupid move by the Saints, to be honest. Like, they keep signing these veterans to contracts that they do not deserve. I mean, Chase Young got a deal. I can't remember exactly how much money it was, but it was a stupid amount of money for how good he's played. Like, he's not played that well. He's played fine. And he just got a massive contract with that team. And I just don't understand what they're doing, man. Like, they continue to sign veterans to big deals, and they don't have the money. They keep kicking the can down the road. And eventually they're going to have to tear it apart, but they're just not willing to admit it. And they keep making stupid choices. They're a terribly managed football team right now. Like, they're a dumpster fire. I'm sorry, Saints fans. They're a dumpster fire. They're going to be a bad team for a while. They need to just tear it apart. And they just continue not to. And this deal is one of the reasons why. Now, looking at offensive line and defense, we have 6 teams we want to talk about in a headline. The Vikings are first. They picked up Jonathan Allen and Devon Hargrave at defensive tackle, as well as Will Fries at guard, beefing up that offensive line, beefing up the trenches. I'm going to be honest, man. Looking at this Vikings roster, top to bottom, if J.J. McCarthy is average, above average, like if he's like, let's say a top 15 quarterback in the league next year, which is not guaranteed, but it's absolutely possible. He sat behind Sam Darnold, who proved to be a really solid quarterback last year. He has Kevin O'Connell as his head coach. He has an elite receiving room around him, elite offensive line in front of him. He could absolutely put up top 15 numbers. If that's the case, this Vikings team will be a Super Bowl contending team. Like a legit Super Bowl contending team. It's just there. This roster is absolutely loaded. And Jimmy McCarthy is a young, aspiring quarterback. Kevin O'Connell is an elite head coach. You have some superstar players in this roster. I think this team could be a Super Bowl contender for the next couple of years with Jimmy McCarthy on that rookie deal, if he's good. Now looking to the Bears. They add Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney, and Drew Dahlman. 3 elite adds at offensive line. Great veteran presences. This is going to be great for Caleb Williams. This is also going to be great for the run game. Looking at DeAndre Swift, he's still alone in this backfield, man. They have not made any additions. It's Roschon Johnson, DeAndre Swift. And while I absolutely believe that there will be an addition to this backfield in the draft, like they still have a lot of pieces to add. They don't have everything figured out on defense. They still have lots of offensive line issues despite their ads. They could still make ads there. And with Keenan Allen likely to departure, you have very limited depth behind Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. You could add another small piece. Running back is not a priority for this team, and they have DeAndre Swift on the big contract. I don't know how shocked I'd be if they didn't add a significant running back in this draft. Now, looking towards the Texans, lost 3 starters on that offensive line with no replacements after being bottom 5 in sacks allowed last year. That is bad. I mean, C.J. Stroud is in trouble, man, especially when it comes to, look, I'm not saying Nico Collins is going to be bad, but when it comes to those deep throws, right, you need time to let those deep throws develop. You need time to let those routes develop. If you're getting pressured within the second, like, this offensive line is terrible right now. Like, if they allow this to happen going into next year, obviously there's the draft. There are still a couple of guys available in free agency that they can add. But if they were to allow basically this offensive line to go into the season, like, C.J. Stroud's going to have 1 or 2 seconds to throw, maybe. And that's just not enough time to let Nico Collins stretch the field. And as a result, I think we can see a huge limit in deep plays from this team, which is really scary. Now, looking towards the Bengals, they lost their entire defense. And, I mean, I kind of talked about this earlier with Joe Burrow and the rest of this offense. They're going to have to score a lot of points to win games. And for fantasy, they're going to be the perfect team. Because good offense and bad defense, it doesn't matter what offense you're playing against. You're going to have to get in some shootouts with this team. Every game is likely going to be a shootout with the Cincinnati Bengals because you can score on their defense, but that offense is going to cook you. So you're going to need to score on their defense to keep up. I think we're going to see a lot of games get into that 55, 60-point range, potentially more than that, especially if they go up against a similar team, maybe like someone like the Buffalo Bills. I'm not saying they have a bad defense, but a great offense that can score some serious points. If you have teams like that going against the Cincinnati Bengals, man, those are going to be some fun games for fantasy. And now lastly, actually no, two teams to talk about. The Broncos. 2 ex-49ers being signed, linebacker Dre Greenlaw and safety Talanoa Hufanga being signed to the Broncos. Bulk up that defense a little bit, get that a little bit better. And if they add a running back, having better defense helps out that run game. Keeps the Broncos in games, keeps them competitive, and lets the run game flow. And I know Sean Payton's going to love that. And the Lions with DJ Reed from the Jets and Roy Lopez, defensive tackle from the Arizona Cardinals. Couple solid starters for the Lions after their fall apart on defense last season. We saw what that caused for this Lions team. It caused them to be in a lot of shootouts, and as a result, to lose to the Washington Commanders. It was like 55 points the Commanders put up on them. It was nasty. So the Lions went out and said, let's add to our defense, make sure that if we have injuries or if these injuries, bleed into next year, we're safe a little bit. So they added a couple defense pieces, and I expect them to add a couple in the draft as well. But that's it for the headlines, and then that's going to be it for today's episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. I greatly appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. Please click that notification bell if there is one, so you'll be notified every single time a new episode does drop. And follow me on Twitter. And I'm at HutchsonB_FF. And go check me out on Blue Sky as well. I post a lot on Blue Sky. I'm at HutchsonB.bluesky.social. I think that's how it says. That's going to be all for today. Thank you all so much again for tuning in. Greatly appreciate you. Next week, we're starting all preparations for the draft. We're talking about prospects. We're talking about my rankings for prospects. We're talking about my profiles for these guys. We're talking about draft expectations. We're going to do a lot of things to preview NFL draft. It's going to be incredibly fun. We will see you all next week.